Welcome back guys to another Odyssey video. I thought it was about time to make a new best weapons list for all the new players and existing players still playing this game in 2023. My last best weapons list was from 2020, so we have a lot of new additions, especially from Corfu Island, the Tartarus pack, etc. And with all the recent builds that mainly focus on the champion Ostraka, some previously very good weapons became less useful in more recent modern builds. So I had to completely change the list and make a new top 15 which are valid for 2023. As usual, this is no beauty contest. I will purely rank the weapons for its usefulness, the engravings and its overall strength. One of the big problems with weapons in this game is that almost every item you can loot with fixed stats is not perfect. Legendary items may have a tiny bit more DPS, but that is not really important. In general, a perfect melee weapon should have warrior damage, damage with its weapon type, like damage with swords, damage with daggers, damage with spears and so on, and critical damage. And then for the last spot, you can still engrave whatever powerful legendary engraving you want. So you can simply get a perfect epic weapon from the blacksmith and just engrave the most powerful engraving from a weapon you actually liked. This engraved epic weapon will then be a much better version of the legendary one which had this engraving. So the tiny bit of more DPS on legendary items is actually negligible if the weapon doesn't have the perfect stats. But if you don't want to grind the blacksmith for your perfect epic weapons, it definitely can't go wrong if you use the weapons from this list. But let's finally check out the items. On spot number 15 we have the Falx of Olympus. The Falx of Olympus unlocks one of the most powerful engravings in the game, the 100% all damage but health capped to 25%. However, it comes with an adrenaline engraving as well and it has assassin damage primary. The assassin damage is not so bad, but the adrenaline is a really bad engraving and the fact that it is only a spare really disqualifies it for most players. You should rather use this engraving and place it on another weapon which is more powerful. A good thing is that the Falx of Olympus can be looted at any level just from an underwater location north of Terra Island. Another example of a really powerful weapon that looks much better on paper than it actually is the Typhons Axe. The Typhons Axe unlocks 200% critical damage with fire attacks. However, this only works with your flaming attacks ability and you always have to wait for a full flaming attacks ability cycle before this ability becomes active. And then it wears off really fast if you don't make continuous fire attacks. On the other hand, this weapon also has a unique 20% crit chance at full health, which is the only weapon in the game that has 20% crit chance on a melee weapon. Even crit chance is already unique for melee weapons and 20% crit chance at full health is even more unique. However, I would only recommend to get this weapon from the store if you really need the additional critical chance in your build and if you like to play with axes. Because you have to port this axe in your build for the additional crit chance and the engraving it unlocks also only works on axes. The Blade of Yumminess is a really good example of another weapon that gives you an incredible bonus that only looks good on paper with 250%, but it blocks all your abilities. And what that means is you will not get your 400% multiplier from Devastating Shot, you will not get 600% from Predator Shot, you will not even get the 1800% damage from your overpower attacks. Instead, the Blade of Yumminess only gives you a stackable 250%, and if you already have 250% damage in your build, adding the Yumminess damage will only give you as much as 100% critical damage would also do. In fact, the champion Ostraka will give you just the same and it will still allow you to heal and use all your abilities. You can get the Blade of Yumminess from any random blacksmith if you just keep reloading his inventory, but it will cost you a fortune and removing all your abilities will just cripple your damage and you end up dealing less damage than before. The Oaken Bow of Chambers is a really crazy epic hunter bow. It has hunter damage, critical damage and headshot damage. Since headshot damage basically is the same as critical damage, this is just like having 100% critical damage on your bow, which makes it just a very insane weapon. It only got place number 12 because there are much better and even crazier bows higher on in the list. You can get this weapon when you loot the Tomb of the Daughters of Atlas in Arcadia. The Copycat Sword is another crazy melee weapon that has critical chance on it, and it is also the most useful one, even though it only has 10% compared to the Typhons Axe. You can use this weapon in any sword build to get the remaining 10% crit chance if you need them. The only downside is the damage with Spartans, which basically makes you lose one engraving slot, which prevents this weapon to be higher on the list. You can get the Copycat Sword when you complete the Really Bad Day questline in Locris. Entering the top 10 we have the Atlantean Blade, which is a really fine dagger because it unlocks the armor penetration engraving. Armor penetration can be almost as strong as another 100% damage, especially for light attacks and arrows, because it lowers your enemy's armor and works as a reverse multiplier. However, the Atlantean Blade itself comes with hunter damage and critical damage, which is not necessarily bad, but if you want to make a warrior build or an assassin build, you would rather want to have this weapon to be assassin damage or damage with that weapon type. So basically only use this weapon to unlock this engraving and place it somewhere else. The Atlantean Blade can be collected at the very end of Idia's story after you collected all the 3 engravings from the statues in a secret stronghold in Lemnos. A real gem and an often overlooked weapon is the Minotaur Mace. The Minotaur Mace is only a blue item, but it is the only melee weapon in the game that has 100% critical damage at full health on it. And you can also engrave another 50% critical damage to get 150% critical damage on a single melee weapon. It is an absolute dream weapon for assassin players or anyone who wants to have a high critical damage. This weapon can be found in the fake Minotaur questline in Pevka when you do the quest What Lies Below the Surface. On spot number 8 we have the Sword of Axon. The Sword of Axon is an almost perfect epic sword. It has warrior damage, fire damage and damages swords. And damages swords is the most important engraving on any melee weapon. You always want to have damage with that weapon type. This weapon is often used together with the Hater's Harper and used in so many builds that I simply had to put it on the list. It is also incredibly easy to loot. You just have to go to the Parthenon in Athens and collect it from the epic chest. On place number 7 I put the Bandit Bow. The Bandit Bow is another unique bow that has critical damage, and from the 4 bows in the game that have critical damage, this one is definitely the best of them. But I had to downgrade the Bandit Bow to place number 7 because we found so much better weapons and so much better bows which are completely outperforming this one. Without spoiling the higher positions, it is not even the second best bow in the game anymore. But it is a good thing that we have better options because the Bandit Bow was only obtainable from Olympian gifts or when Sargon randomly decided to sell it. Another weapon I had to downgrade to a lower rank is the Spartan Javelin. The Spartan Javelin is the only melee weapon in the game that has 30% melee resistance on it, which can be used to get 100% immune versus all melee attacks in any build you want. But with the super powerful Corfu engraving with minus 100% resistances, resistance builds became very much out of fashion. You can simply make the most powerful builds with the champion Ostraker and just use Isu enhance instead. This unique Spartan Javelin with 30% melee resistance can only be acquired when you do the Mykonos storyline, you follow Taleta's quest and kill the last commander on Delos Island. The forged Isu Spears are an incredible group of 3 weapons that can be forged in the 3rd episode of the Atlantis DLC. They are unlocking the damage conversion engraving, which simply makes all your builds to become incredible super powerful hybrid builds. And all of them will also have damage spears on them. However, most of the time you will just use the engraving and not use the spears itself, and that means they will only be place 5. On place number 4 we have the Knife of Dallwun. The Knife of Dallwun gives you a guaranteed assassination for any enemy that is below your level or the same level than you, no matter how much assassination damage you actually have. This is what Assassin's Creed was all about in previous titles. When Ubisoft created this weapon, they had all those old players in mind who were struggling to make good builds in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. By simply using this knife, they eliminated all the overhead of the build system and just gave the players what they needed. However, the weapon does not allow you to assassinate enemies higher than your level, and with some more sophisticated builds, you would be easily able to even exceed the damage you deal with the Knife of Dallwun and even assassinate the highest level enemies with a normal assassination. So the Knife of Dallwun makes life easier for new players, but with some more sophisticated builds with the Corfu engraving, with the Falx engraving, you will achieve the same and even more. However, it definitely deserved a spot on this list. You will acquire the Knife of Dallwun automatically when you play Corfu Island at the moment when you escape from the prison. Hater's Harper is one of the most famous weapons in the game. It is the only lootable perfect sword in the game. It has warrior damage, damages swords and critical damage. In the beginning I already told you that these engravings make a perfect weapon. So on Hater's Harper you can engrave any legendary engraving you want to get your perfect sword with whatever powerful legendary engraving you want it to have. This simply makes it one of the most versatile weapons and most versatile swords and best weapons in the game. Simply put, it is the best melee weapon you can get in this game. Hater's Harper can be acquired from the Friend in Need quest in Attica. Make sure you lie to Hater to keep the sword. On place number 2 we have the best conventional bow in the game, and that is another weapon from Corfu Island, the Second Sight. The Second Sight bow unlocks a unique engraving with 200% headshot damage, which basically acts like 200% critical damage whenever you make a headshot, but it reduces your warrior and assassin damage by 100%. So if you want to make a conventional hunter build without using the Bighorn Bow, then this is by far the best weapon you can use. The 200% headshot damage will be so powerful, especially when you combine it with the Corfu engraving with additional 200% damage to all damage types, that you will be able to obliterate every single enemy in the game as early as on level 5. You can basically play the whole game by just using this weapon. But that is still nothing compared to what the Bighorn Bow does. The Bighorn Bow will double all your warrior damage by adding all its 6495 DPS to your left melee weapon, and then it will basically quadruple all your hunter damage, making you deal 4 times the amount of hunter damage than you would usually deal, because it also uses your warrior damage when you shoot arrows. This makes the Bighorn Bow by far the most broken item in any Assassin's Creed game, and it is the most valuable and actually the only item you should get from the store. And the best of it, you can completely get it for free, because the game gives you 200 Helix credits just when you finish the Mega Restory arc, which you can then use to go to the shop and purchase this bow entirely for free. This item is used in almost any build since the last 3 years. It is a must-have item that is giving you so much damage that you can simply one-shot every mythical creature with a single overpower attack. However, you still have to make a decent build for it, so check out the build videos on this channel and don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like, and see you next time.